So let me tell you a little bit about our research and some of our findings. And Andre and I have never talked. He's never heard my presentation, so this is going to be just kind of raw, which will be fun for me at least. So 15 years ago, my partner, Rick Foster, and I decided to study happy people without any science in mind. We started with zero science. We started with people. So we traveled all around the world. We went to all 7 continents looking for these happy people. And our favorite way to find them was to head into villages that we'd never heard of before in Asia and Europe and Africa, and simply ask the locals, or the first people we came across on the street, anybody happy in this like charming little village? And typically they would give us a name, and we would call that person up and invite ourselves over. So we always wanted to be in their turf, in their living room, and nobody ever once turned us down in 3 years of doing this, well over 300 in-depth interviews. They would cook for us often. I mean, it was a great gig, I'm telling you. Finding these happy people was great. Now, the writing wasn't so fun, but the finding. And our original idea, I'll just tell you really quickly, was that we thought we would collect the 100 most interesting stories, kind of like Chicken Soup for the Soul, you know, those books, because like they did pretty well. So we thought, you know, maybe we would jump on that bandwagon. And, you know, how does someone do it in Buenos Aires and how does someone do it in Istanbul? The reality was, and we fought this, as diverse as they were all telling us the same thing. And what we saw, without any science whatsoever, was that there were 9 universal behaviors, regardless of the culture, regardless of the age. And because now we do medical research, what we have discovered over time is that these 9 behaviors, which eventually tonight I'd love to share with you, our roadmap to happiness, these 9 behaviors are all things that you have 100% control over. They're all choices. Nobody else has to play along. So in our model, unlike some other happiness models, there's not things in there like you have to have an intimate relationship to be happy. We would say if you do our 9 things, which you can control, you have a much better shot probably of having a healthy relationship. And the other thing that we've come to believe about our model is that the reason they work is because every one of these things helps ensure the survival of our species. That we get a biochemical blast of these happy-inducing chemicals when we do these 9 things because they help us survive. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, good. So far we're good.
One of the reasons it makes a lot of sense, first, that you would find a rather constrained set of behaviors or actions or ways to happiness is, if you're a biologist like I am, you don't imagine that people are built all that differently. There's no one really that special. My family isn't happy about that, but that's certainly the case. We're all more or less built, and we're built on a distribution, if you will, around the same principles. And so it would be really surprising to find that there were lots of different ways to achieve something so fundamental, 1. 2, to try and achieve something we imagine is so fundamental. I'm going to ask you in a moment what happiness is, because I'm not all that clear about exactly what it is, but I have an intuitive sense. It's whatever it is, it's happiness, and it's a major drive, at least in my life and in the lives of a lot of people I know. Things like that are biological, in a sense, imperatives. And again, you develop ways of achieving them, not because you're a genius, but because you come from a long line of evolution and biology that's trying to realize that. Another feature that sort of would come out of a biological evolutionary view of this is that almost anything that you can find that's not unique within a group of any biological elements, whether they're just fruit flies or apes, rats, or people, again, is a thing that has likely persisted for a long time and is good for getting that group of creatures, that species, to continue existing. Okay? Those kinds of things disappear with time because there's genetic material and so on. And so all of the behaviors that I imagine you're going to talk about from a neuroscientist point of view, and we have to remember I'm a neuroscientist, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't really know that much about psychology, but a neuroscientist's job is to try and explain behaviors that we can observe, okay, on the basis, or explain them from the point of view of how do neurons, how do the 100 billion elements you have in the brain organize themselves and work to achieve those behaviors. Okay? There's no reason for this, it's just how those neurons work. Okay? And the rules by how they work are not entirely under our control. Okay? They are given, very much like a computer code is given to a machine, and those very cleverly designed instructions can execute and produce all manner of things, but they are not entirely in our control at the level of the 100 billion neurons. It's really very interesting, though, in the mammalian brain, as you get higher and higher to primates and human primates, there are very interesting feedback mechanisms that allow us, through our actions in the world, to not change the fundamental instructions of those neurons, but to change the operations within the functional constraints of those neurons. So everything so far that you've said kind of makes sense that you would find a relatively small set of rules. It probably seems simple, right? When we in the lab look at something complicated, I study how memories are stored and how you find the right kinds of memories in your vast array of memories from your experience. How do you find the right ones for a particular occasion, like I'm searching for right now, and keep the irrelevant ones from getting in your way? So that's a relatively complicated thing, but I'm convinced, and it seems to work that way, as we learn more and more how this complicated thing works, it's usually on a few very simple principles, because that's what you can transfer from one generation to the next generation. It's those really basic fundamental rules. You know, DNA has a certain physical structure that is very easy to realize chemically, it's very easy to preserve that chemically, and it's very useful for storing information. So we all, everything we know that is biological uses DNA to store its genetic material. So it's not a surprise, it's impressive that you could identify what those rules are, because that's what I'm in search of, basic rules of complicated behavior.
So yeah, to that, our belief is that human beings have something, well, many things, but one thing that we have that other animals don't have is a more sophisticated ability to choose. Whereas we don't have the sharpest claws or the biggest teeth, or we don't run as fast as maybe a leopard or something, we've got this ability to choose. So you set me up perfectly for this, and let's see what you think about this, Andre. Our first of these 9 things, the thing that's the foundation of the whole model, is the notion of intention. And our belief is that your intention, which is like your attitude or your behavior, drives all action. Now, you might not be consciously aware of your intention, but you have to have an intention before you can have an action. And in I'm going to involve the whole audience in this, because I'm going to say a sentence and you guys give me the last word of this. This was like one big finding. To your point about it's kind of simple. Happy people intend to be happy. Yeah, that was the big finding. So thank you very much. But on one hand,
it totally makes sense.
I know. On one hand, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? And on the other hand, it's kind of profound.
It's very profound.
That their active intention, the seed they plant up here in their head, is to look for the joy. Now, you'll see if we have time to go through for the whole model. This is not a Pollyanna model, like you should just always see the silver lining. there's things in this model that really ask you to access your sadness and your anger and your fear to get to a better place. But the notion of the whole thing is we can't often choose our circumstances, but we can always choose, or I believe, we can always choose our reaction and our attitude and our intention, that nobody can take that away from us. And that, we also heard from these people that moment to moment to moment to moment to moment, we can set our intention. Rather than, you know how people say, oh, I'm just on automatic pilot, I'm just reacting all day long. That before anything we do, pick up the phone to call somebody, a client, say, what's my best intention? What's my best intention? Instead, left unchecked, it might be just, okay, wanted to know, if you had time to look through our material, versus maybe, a better intention might be just to listen. Or just to say, how's your day going? So you're constantly making the choice. You're constantly making a choice, and my belief is that the more we feel like we're in control, the happier we are.
So that's almost certainly the case for rats, because I know a lot about rats. So
Well,
one way to look at a rat, and rats are really a lot like us. So are fruit flies. Fundamentally, they have to feed. Right? Fundamentally, they need to reproduce, or their drives to do this. They need to rest. Their drives to do this. The drive for feeding is, in fact, even more simple than that. There's a need for energy so that you can just continue to be. There's a need to regulate, if you have blood, your glucose level in the blood. And there are sensors in the brain and in other neural systems in insects that don't have brains that know how cold it is, how much sugar there is, how much energy, molecules, ATP there are, and so on. And one of the problems is when you get more and more complicated, you can have different drives, right? So in the instance of having to call that client, your boss can be one of those drives, and you need to fundamentally keep your job or something like that. You want to maintain your credibility. You promised that you would call at that time. That's another psychological, perhaps not biological drive, but nonetheless a drive. And I don't know about rats' psychological drives, but I can watch and create situations where their intention to feed and their intention to avoid punishment or avoid something unpleasant are in conflict. Okay? And that's pretty typical of life when you start living in more and more complex social arrangements and in complex environments that you need to control because you don't have a good enough coat or fur, right, and things like that. And so one of the basic problems then is if you study the basic biological drives, you can sense your glucose level by measuring a chemical. Okay? You can sense your temperature by building little things that feel how cold it is or sense the temperature of blood, little proteins that do that. But they're different. They're apples and oranges, right? And how is it that a little creature like a fly or a rat or big creatures like us can translate those apples and oranges into a common currency? Because ultimately, you can only do one thing at a moment, right? You have to decide to go get the food or to stay warm. You have to decide to try and seek a life mate, if that's one of your drives, versus trying to stay safe and protected. Okay? And it's very difficult to have these parallel processes running with a singular output. And it's really hard to arrange things so that you can do multiple actions that are not mutually exclusive and such. And that happens for everything. So ultimately, brains have a problem. They have to translate these different drives, which come from the outside world in different sensations. They have to put them into a common currency, okay? And they can't average. Right? Taking the average between whether I should stay warm or whether I should seek a mate doesn't get me the right temperature or help me to reproduce. It leads to nonsense behavior. So they're forced in some way to value these things, okay, and make a decision, whether conscious or not. And that's the neat thing. A lot of research, at least done in primates, and some done in people, shows you that when making a choice, very often the neurons seem to be deciding, if you will, or they have already evaluated the situation, and you can predict before the choice seems to have been made what the brain has decided. So in some sense, yes, you have to make a decision, but, and here's where I'm going to sort of challenge you. In many ways,
I'm
your
big
brain...
on intention, so you better watch out.
In many ways, right, your brain has decided. Now, it depends what you mean by intention, right? If intention is changing how your brain makes those value judgments, okay, then we're okay. But very often, the brain is deciding, even before you're allowed to execute your action, because it's got to filter these things down into a common currency, and it's got to choose, because you can't do too many things at once. Most things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so what I would say to that is that, yes, I mean, you're not consciously choosing everything, but to the degree that you can involve yourself in the practice of intention, which is, I'm just about to do something. Now, what's my best choice? I'm just about to reprimand my teenager. What's my best choice? Rather than that reactive kind of like, I told you not to do this, which, doesn't always work. And I think sometimes stating your intention to your teenager, I don't know how we got on this, but how stating your intention to your teenager, like, here's why I'm so upset. Because, this happened. Nothing always works with teenagers, or, we could write about it and be billionaires. But I think the act of thinking right now in this situation, I've got several choices, rather than my automatic response.
So you've used the right words, right?
Good.
A neat thing about at least the human brain and higher primate brains is we have two ways: an automatic way of responding to the world, which is very valuable for getting you out of really clear and dangerous situations. Tiger walks by, we will all very likely have the very same conserved response, which is to feel fear. Okay? Some of us will freeze. Okay? I will flee, because that happens to be my way. Very likely, what we've all done is assess this as dangerous, okay? And there's an automatic mode, if you will, in brains to do certain things. Now, I suspect if I had been a tiger trainer, or I know that the tiger lives here and is declawed and has no fangs and is kind
old
and all
and
that,
has no energy,
and so on and so on, I would feel differently. But if not, then what is at play, and this becomes very interesting, we all don't react exactly the same way to situations, even when we don't know better. And maybe that's what you're getting at with intention. In psychology and neuroscience, we call this, there are two levels of control: cognitive control, okay, or emotional control, which is a subset of cognitive control. And this is the recognition that at any moment of time, you can think about something in multiple ways. Okay? And you have multiple emotional or cognitive drives, multiple interpretations of things. Okay? And there's a typical default or automatic way to react to that understanding. Okay? And you have to put the brakes on that. That's fast. It helps you survive when tigers walk into the room, right? But it may not always be the wisest thing for you to do.
Okay, you don't know this because you don't know the model, but you totally set me up for number two.
Right.
This is exactly number two.
From first principles.
Exactly. So we're even going in order. So the tiger example and the appropriate stress response, but you don't want to be in that chronic response all the time.
Very bad.
Obviously, very, very bad. So before I tell you what number 2 is, I'm going to give you like a little bit more of the research that leads us to number 2. At one point, because we work at UC Berkeley, and I think you work here at NYU.
I do.
We teach there. We went to some social researchers that we felt knew a lot more about social research than we did, and we told them what we were doing, and they said, okay, so there's one thing we like about your research, and there's a bunch of things we don't like. So what we like is you didn't go in trying to prove these 9 things existed. It sort of happened organically. But what we didn't like is that you're only talking to happy people. You have no control group. So in our case, I'm going to involve you guys. What would the control group be? The opposite. Unhappy, yeah. New Yorkers. No, I don't believe that. I love New Yorkers. So we did that, and the way we did that was, this was, 10 years ago.
That must have been fun.
Well, yeah, no, it wasn't. This was.
Offer to cook you something?
No, there was no food involved. That's a very good point. Yeah, I never thought about it quite that way. But we actually put an ad in the paper, in the Marin County Independent Journal, that we were looking for just downright miserable people that would be willing to talk to us. Again, no science. Just like if you called us, we'll talk to you. But we got a lot of response. We did not pay people, and people were really excited to talk to us. So why do you think they were so excited to talk to us?
These unhappy people. And
Yeah.
were they unhappy?
Yeah,
Okay.
miserable.
I can imagine one reason for this is that quite often they didn't get to talk to people about being unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one. And second, I imagine they often wanted to talk about their unhappiness and it's not something that they're typically able to do.
Yeah, I think they surround themselves with other people who are unhappy that they can complain with. But they were excited to talk to us because they wanted to convince us that in their case it was impossible to be happy. Like, I can get why, these other people are happy, but to your point earlier, I am special. Because I've had a lot of stuff that other people haven't had happen to me. Like, I had surgery last year, and then my cat ran away, and then, and not that those aren't painful things.
Sure.
But actually, generally, the happy people had more traumatic events in their life than the unhappy people. The big finding for us, no science, but
Right.
that's
rule number one.
that's the theme that will continue, was that the more people say they're unhappy and are rooted in their unhappiness, the more in their life they see themselves as a victim. And actually, we had already determined that our second one is accountability, that the happy people basically refuse to blame, which is kind of shocking to refuse to blame. I mean, we talk to Holocaust survivors. We talk to people, if anybody had, and we even said, well, wouldn't it be like therapeutic to blame? And I remember this one woman in particular who at the time was 80-something, and a lot of her family was killed in the Holocaust. And she said, if I had blamed them, should they be held accountable? Absolutely. If I had blamed them for the last 50 years, I would have given them some perverse power over me that I didn't want to do. And if you think about blame, to me, it's not a real emotion like anger or sadness, which are important. It never helps you. It never helps you. But I think it's one of those automatic defensive responses. And when you're in that victim place a lot, like chronically, I think it's almost always like the tiger's just about to attack. So your body is revved up, and it's not doing what it really needs to do in its resting state, which is help you digest properly and survey for cancer cells and
Sure.
all those things.
What's pretty clear is when you're stressed, and I imagine if we took corticosterone levels or something like that, or some stress scale, these unhappy people would probably seem stressed. That would be my guess. And one of the pretty clear findings in biology is that your cells, okay, react in one of two ways. When there are stress hormones around, okay, they, in their little cell ways, behave as if they need to get through the next few minutes.
Right.
Okay? We need to mobilize all of our resources to run from the immediate threat. We don't want to build proteins for reproductive purposes, for anything that would be pleasant, for the future, if you will. They need to mobilize all of their resources to sort of get through now. Okay? And when that happens, there are several interesting things that occur. It's very hard, okay, to get out of the mode of responding in whatever your automatic happens to be. Okay? Whatever that automatic happens to be, for most of us with the tiger, it is to run. I don't know what it is when I'm sitting in my, I don't know what unhappy actually means, but when I'm in my blaming conversation, if that becomes your automatic, okay, right, and it's stressful, God help you.
Well, this
right?
is why,
you're stuck.
Andre, everything in our model comes back to intention. Because, I myself, I talk about this like every day of my life for the last 10 years. I can get in one of those blamey places too, but to me, it's just having the awareness to say, I mean, for me, the way I do it is, I want to survey for cancer cells. So, like I got to, figure out how to get rid of this blame and go to something more productive. Uh-huh. And I'm not always successful, but, that's the intention.
So I wonder if we can help you, if that's what happens, right, if that's the case, because we can reduce the stress response, right? There are pills you can take. The newspaper is claiming that. There are pills you can take for that. There are beverages that can help with that, and so on.
In the short term.
Right. Certainly in the short term. And so the question then is, maybe aids like that are useful for such people in a really dangerous place. And the real problem then becomes, where is the border between a place where you don't need that and you're in danger of harming yourself, making irreversible damage, and when do you get the chemical help? Because the chemicals that we have can interfere with stress. We are pretty good at that.
Yeah. Well, so we work with people who have chronic disease around this model. And what we've seen many times is it's the combination of the medication and the choice. So if you're clinically depressed, perhaps you don't even have the wherewithal to make these choices. Right. So if you can find the right medication that can elevate you to the place that you can start to set your intention and make better choices and not fall victim to each thing that somebody did to you, because I'm from Berkeley, so I can say this, but like when you're in that blamey place, you just give away all your power. That was the Berkeley thing. Yeah, you just give away your power because you say, well, this, poor me, and I can't believe what she said to me, and then you feel like you don't have
control. And it doesn't make you feel any better. That's really the worst part of it. I would argue that if you found an individual where it actually did make them feel better can be translated into chemical terms, right? You can have more oxytocin released. You can have less corticosterone released. If you could manage that by blaming, I would say, well, go ahead,
go for it.
And do some blaming and get out of that rut, because you're kind of stuck with what you have.
Yeah.
One of the very, I think, important findings in neuroscience in the last, there's never any big discovery that's been percolating, is the fact that new neurons are being born every day in the human as well as every mammalian species we've looked at in their brains, in a particular part of the brain that has a lot to do with what I would imagine intention is and so on in the brain, in the hippocampus, a place where memories are encoded and such. And to me, one of the fascinating things that we've discovered recently, and I really believe what I'm about to say is true because there's been indications of this in research for the last 10 years. It's just not as beautifully crystallized and demonstrated as we've just done. So, and that is when these new neurons are not being born, because we know how to kill those new neurons or stop them from being born, then rats, or in this case mice, really have difficulty making choices, it seems. It's very clear that they don't want to get, they are given a choice between doing something to avoid a bad thing and doing something else to avoid a bad thing. Okay? And what's really interesting is they end up unable to decide which one is better in some sense, and they end up with limited opportunities for their behavior. And this itself is stressful.
Yes.
Now, the really unkind part of this is a really good way to stop those neurons from growing is to be stressed. Okay? So it's really a really unfair cycle, if you will. Stress reduces your cognitive flexibility. It's harder to make decisions.
It's harder to make good choices.
Okay? Harder to make good choices. That becomes stressful. Your opportunities narrow, and you get more stress, or your stress persists, and the whole thing just leaves you in a terrible place or makes your situation worse.
So we have this this concept, because a lot of what I do is to take this model and work with leadership teams or work with companies to create a workplace that's happy, where people feel energized and motivated. And one of the things we talk about is this concept of triangulation. So triangulation, we used to call it the water cooler syndrome, but it's like kind of the meeting after the meeting, you know, where a couple of people get together and, you know, you and I talk and we go, what's your name?
Dave.
Dave. And we say, can you believe how stupid that was? And you say, yeah, I mean, it was, she doesn't even know why she's vice president, I don't know. And, you know, we do this whole thing, and basically it feels fun in the moment because it's very seductive. Because I know I forgot your name already. Dave. It's such a hard name, too. That we feel like we're bonding, but it's this fake bonding because it's around our shared misery. And we actually do spiral each other down. So it's a scourge. It's impossible to have a high trust environment when we've got people like Dave and I triangulating. So we do a lot of work, and you get yourself, and then the myth becomes reality. You know, it's like, and Dave says, well, I heard that they're gonna, you know, make all of us, you know, do this. And I go, oh my, and so suddenly that becomes reality, and now we've really spiraled our stuff down. So I'm gonna go to 3 and 4.
Okay.
Get your thoughts on 3 and 4. So 3 is identification, which is that happy people have already identified what it is that brings them joy and all their passions and everything they love to do. Like, you ask them and they're like a racehorse out of a gate. They're like, oh, cooking these kinds of dinners with my spouse, doing this, taking these kind of hikes, doing this. And centrality, the 4th one, is that they consciously, intentionally make those things central in their life. So they really capitalize on it. And what they would say is, if I love camping, for instance, even though I've got a family to raise and a demanding job, I don't go 4 years without camping. It's not debatable to me. Like, I'm not going to wait till I'm 65 to live my passions. I consciously do it now, and then that was very different, as you can imagine, with the unhappy group.
Yeah, there's so many things to do when I'm not unhappy.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, right, exactly.
it'll be great. Yeah, so this leads me to, so that makes, I'm starting to take your research as the data, right? So
Okay.
these are the
Number
things we
5
observe.
will
right?
freak you out. But okay.
These
but-
are the things. These are the things we
I'm just
observe.
warning you.
I retract that.
Okay, no, sorry.
These are so far. These are the data. I'm an empiricist. These are the data. They look like they come from a trustworthy source, and so forth. And so my job then, and this is how I think as a neuroscientist, I look around my world. I look at my own behavior. I look at the behaviors of animals and people, and I say, well, that's what seems common, and I'd like to understand how the brain does that. So what you've just described makes, again, a lot of intuitive sense as to why that would promote happiness. And so I'm wondering, why would that promote happiness? Well, it's clear that the behavior sort of reinforces the other principles, but why? And so the notion that comes to mind is that in some real sense, the human brain is really good at recording its history. Okay? It doesn't ever record its history in a veridical, sort of perfect way like that video camera is recording this sort of continuously and passively. At least I don't believe that, and I don't think the research shows that. It records stuff in a sort of fractionated way that's more or less the gist of your life, and you have access to that. Okay? But you can't just trigger, press play and have it play out. Okay? You effortfully have to go and reconstruct your history every time you try and recollect it. Okay? And it's very difficult to do that, okay, if you don't have the appropriate for the current circumstances intentions, and if you don't have the appropriate for the current circumstances goals, it's probably easy to never remember that you like camping, okay? Because in many ways you've stored the camping episodes, right? But without the appropriate mood, focus, intention, as far as you know and you have conscious access to, camping's not available to you, right?
So
That is such a good point, and I'm going to tell you something funny, Andre. We sort of said that to people. We said, so how do you keep all this in mind? And you're going to think I'm lying, but like more than half of them said, oh, wait a minute, I have a list. They're all here. I wrote them all down, and I look at the list. So it's an interesting process, actually. Yeah, bucket list, right. It's an interesting process to take 5 minutes sometime, get a piece of paper, and just, we call it speed writing, but it's where you don't censor. You don't say, oh, well, I don't know, that's kind of a stupid one. You just like empty your brain, and you don't think of like what you do now, you think of what you've ever loved to do. Mm-hmm. And then, so in our model, it all comes back to attention. You're right. I mean, you have to like say, okay, what's even one thing on this list that I could take steps to doing today? And maybe if one of the things on your list is I love having cut flowers in the house, that you think, oh, okay, so I'm going to stop on the way home from work and get one bunch of flowers and put some in every room of my house. Because there's something, in my mind, sort of psychologically beneficial when you walk into any room in your house and you see those flowers and you just, like that you did something good for yourself. Absolutely. It's kind of like... All right, so I'm going to do the one that. Did you have more to say?
Well, I was going to say let me, because I have a coherent thought at this point.
Go
so the other bad or good thing about memories is they essentially, and you might not agree with this, they essentially construct who you are at this moment, right? What is available to you, and so is not just what you intend, but what is easy to retrieve, okay? And what is easy to retrieve is very often the stuff that you rehearse, the stuff that happens over and over, the stuff that becomes more automatic-like, right? So someone says to you, what do you like? Those people have lists, right? But quite often we all keep our lists, whether they're true or not doesn't matter. Okay? We all have these sort of automatic responses to things. And that thing that's currently reverberating in your mind or easy to access is very often governing what you do. So I'm in a neuroscience lab. I love to believe that we all have big beards and we stroke them because we're thinking all the time and so on. But I can look around the lab. There are 12 or so people in my lab, and it's amazing how automatic their behaviors happen to be, for good and bad. So there's a great postdoc in my laboratory. He is so meticulous that he can't help, he wouldn't be able to stand that these weren't stacked together, because it just, that's how it sort of should be. And that's really great if you're an electrophysiologist trying to put tiny wires into a rat's brain, and if you sneeze the wrong way, those wires could bend and ruin 2 days of work and so on. And this is his automatic way of being. He's horrible outside of the laboratory.
Yeah.
Don't invite him for Christmas dinner and so on. But he's terrific, and so what's interesting there is he has developed a certain set of habits, if you will, right? These are rules of behavior that have become more and more automatic, okay? And if they don't include the things that make you happy, okay, you're going to do them a lot of the time. You're going to spend your resources doing them a lot of the time. And they're not promoting your happiness. They'll promote something. In the case of this person, that person will be very neat. Okay? Things will be in the right place. I don't think they breed unhappiness in his instance. Okay? But okay, if they did, okay, that's again a very difficult rote vortex to get out of, because you've made it your brain's business to continue doing this. There's a song that you're reminding me of. When I was in high school,
Are you going to sing?
I'm not going to sing this. There was a song, a band called This Mortal Coil, and I love this this collection of people. And there was a song that was almost spiritual to me. It was called The Jeweler, and the words are something like this: the jeweler has a shop on the corner of the boulevard, and basically, this jeweler spends his time polishing old coins, and that's all that the jeweler seems to do. Okay? And it's almost meditative, but the jeweler polishes old coins because he doesn't want them to have scars. Okay? And he knows that even new coins will get scars, but nonetheless, this is what he does. And the chorus is, he worships God with ashes. That is his intent. Okay? Yeah. It might not look great to you and me. In fact, I couldn't imagine, that's sort of a hell to me. But nonetheless, right. And I believe the song that the jeweler is happy. Okay? I don't know if the jeweler ever thinks about anything else, but this is his practice to worship.
So one of the things we found, and this is an important point, is that if you've got, let's say you've got this list of all the things you love, it's not a numbers game. In other words, if you did 40 things, you're going to be happier than the person that really focuses on 2 things. The person that focuses on 2 things, if they really love those 2 things, can be just as happy or potentially happier. All right, now I want to go to the 5th one. Is called recasting. And I don't think you're going to disagree with the concept, but you might. But one thing you might disagree with, so we'll see. So recasting is the process we saw people use when they really hit a trauma in their life, where it really isn't appropriate to say, well, let me find the silver lining. That's reframing, where you just say, oh, how can I see this in a better light? Recasting, you might always see this as a sad thing, but in recasting, you take something from it. So there's 3 steps to recasting. The first step is that they seem to go to their emotions first. And these are primary emotions like anger, fear, sadness, because, in my opinion, those are our best guideposts. Because our emotions, if we feel it, don't typically lie. If we feel angry, it's not like, oh, there's no reason why we're angry, or we feel sad, there's like 0 reason. So they really help us identify what's underneath the stress. So here's my controversial comment. I don't believe we are our mind. I think our brain is nuts, and I don't think you can ever count on it. You cannot count on your brain in the way that I'm going to tell you, which is just left unchecked, your brain can get defensive, make up, just like Dave and I triangulating, we can make up stories about why we think the boss did, and then they become true. So our brain is not something you can count on in recasting. You start with your emotions because it's a much better, and one could say they're all kind of connected, but it's a much better indicator of what's true. And then the next step of recasting is meaning, which can be a little bit more logical. It's like, why am I in this boat? What did I do? You know, it's like, it helps you for the next time. What can I learn? And then the third thing is, well, then what's the opportunity? So can I tell you a recasting story?
That'll help.
Okay.
Give me time to think.
All right, good. So this is a recasting story about a woman who had 6 things happen to her kind of all in the same period of time. So house burned down in the big
That's
Oakland
bad.
fire. That was bad. Nothing left but ashes. Husband left her for another woman. So that was bad. Both parents died unexpectedly. So that was bad. Business, which was a restaurant, went bankrupt due to a greedy landlord. That was not
It's
good.
like a country western song.
I,
Really bad.
then the house burned down. That's a good idea. And her best friend moved away, and she had no children, but her dog was like her child, and her dog died in the fire. So we said to her, okay, so you're one of these, referred to us as one of these extremely happy people, so like, you know, what's the deal? And,
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, what's your problem? And she said, you know, in the beginning, I think I was kind of in denial, which I think can be a good coping strategy for a while. But she said, I forced myself at a certain point to feel the sadness. You know, I cried, I went to support groups, I went to therapy, I started looking at what I was learning. But she said, I came up with an opportunity, and she said, I'm still sad about many of these things. But she said, I came up with an opportunity that turned the whole thing around, and here was the opportunity. She decided, I'm the only 40-year-old woman I know who has an unencumbered life. Now, maybe I didn't want one, but how many 40-year-olds have a clean slate? You know, no spouse, no job, no car, no house, no pet, what 40-year-old has that?
Right.
So in our model, everything goes back to intention, right? And she said, I just decided to rebuild my life, and my only motivation, meaning intention, was to be happy this time. So she, you know, picked the architect, and she built this house with these big windows that cost $1 zillion, which prevented her from, you know, like putting in an extra bathroom. I mean, she just, all the decisions were driven by happiness. So the point of recasting is, again, it's not that you're necessarily gonna see it as a great thing, but you're gonna take something from it, because the other alternative is to go back to victimhood. I mean, that woman certainly could have wallowed forever, maybe.
Maybe even should have.
Well,
Given
that's
like, you know,
well, that wouldn't be recasting, though, Andre, would it?
no, that's remarkable. That
Yeah.
really is.
So going back to the triangulation, you know, when we work with people, we say, well, one great alternative to triangulation is to recast it. Because I don't think the opposite of triangulation is just, if you have all these negative emotions, just stuff them down. I mean, we know that doesn't work very well either. But if you think about recasting, it still starts with the negative emotion, right? But if Dave and I got in this thing where we said, okay, so what could we do about, what's the opportunity for you and I, even though we didn't like this idea and blah, 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 then potentially we have the opportunity to spiral ourselves up, because we've got more hope, potentially, because we have more options, at least in our own minds.
Well, the bad news is I agree with you.
That our brain is nuts.
Our brain is nuts.
Yeah.
Okay? What would you expect of, you know, 100 billion stupid little elements that have to follow very tiny rules about, making sure they have a certain amount of ATP and not too much, and they have to make proteins on a particular schedule, and so on. Very often, our brain behaves not very often, typically, our brains behave in the easiest way it is for that system to behave. That's kind of what the automatic is. What was probably easy for that woman, and would have been easy for most people, is to stay in a very dark, negative place. Okay? And so I'm wondering, how is it that she recasts, right? That's very important, right? But her brain must have not wanted to do that. That's my first guess. Okay? But it did. Right? So there's the data eventually. So what would allow that to happen? And I think of it this way. If brains are not that different than a complex organization like a society, okay? Full of independent agents who have relationships, but not relationships everywhere, and certain abilities, certain parts of the brain control certain functions and so on, specializations. And those things tend to just keep behaving in a certain regime that is easy for it. Okay? But every so often, a revolution happens. Okay? So what is it? What's the revolution in this person's brain? And I have no idea. Okay? But the clue to me is that she seems to have felt her emotions. She seems to have been sad for long enough. Okay? And my guess is that when you're really feeling, and you're not thinking so much, but actually feeling, those circuits that keep repeating and reinforcing and reanalyzing to no particular end can at least be left alone. Okay? And when they're left alone, okay, I imagine that she got lucky. She might have even tried a bunch of times. Okay? But when left alone, it's in many ways, as I'm making this up as I go on, but it sounds pretty good to me so far. Right? In many ways, it's not unlike sleeping. So one of the neat things about a brain is that it has no choice but to deal with input. Your eyes are sending information into your brain, whether you want it there or not. Your skin is sending that information. All of your senses is bombarding your brain with activity. Your brain is always active. Okay? And in many ways, the activity constrains the brain. Okay? So when you sleep, that's when you dream. Okay? I don't know, there are theories about why you dream and so on, but instead of dreaming, go and meditate. Go into a sensory deprivation situation and see what happens to your brain. See what happens to your mind when you remove all of that input. The constraints, in some sense, get relaxed. Okay? And it's in that space, I would hazard, okay, that you have the shot, you have a chance of finding a new regime. Right? A different regime, one that is not stuck in the regular pattern, which is driven in many ways from the outside. It doesn't have to be driven from the outside, but it typically is, because there are information channels in, and you have to deal with that somehow. Neurons have to deal with it. So I'm guessing that in this remarkable situation, this person, through their emotions, got their thinking, deciding brain to relax a little bit, if you will, and came up, I argue, lucky, but with insight. Okay?
Just have a question for you.
So I'm not from California, but my wife's family's there, and her family cares about Christmas, and my family hasn't really. So we often go there for Christmas. And I wondered, what is it that I can do here if I have to go to Santa Barbara all the time? And I decide to take up surfing. And I find I'm almost addicted to surfing. I'm tempted to try and move to California so that I can surf, because I love I'm a lousy surfer, so I spend most of the time floating, right? waiting for waves. And it doesn't matter to me. In fact, I really like it when there are no waves and there's no one there.
And you're just
Yeah,
floating.
and I'm just floating because it seems...
You can put it on your centrality list, floating.
Floating is good. And I find it extremely peaceful. And one of the reasons I think I find it peaceful is there's nothing to do but float, right? I look out, there's very little to catch my attention. I'm not struggling, should I try and ride that wave or that, especially when it's calm. There's no one to talk to because you don't talk, dudes don't do that. And I'm just sort of there, and it's not that hard, but it takes effort typically to shut out all of that stuff, okay? And be alert. And I find floating a great way to do that.
Yeah.
So instead of surfing, I can't surf, I take really long showers, and it's a problem in the family, but I can't help it. I've switched to showering every other day so I can take a really long shower,
Is this an on day or an off day?
Today's an on day.
Okay, good.
For exactly that reason. So I don't really know why, but I find what you described true for me too. And what do we get taught to do? Try to focus on something, okay? Not so much as to screen out everything, but to not be controlled by everything. How do you control your mind is half of what this comes down to, so that you can make appropriate choices for you and you can have appropriate intentions for you. A lot of it isn't to ignore everything around you, but to not allow it to control you.
Yes.
Okay? And that's really hard when the information keeps coming in.
So, so the next one after recasting is options. And this was one of the things at first that we found surprising. Some of these people said, my only goal is to have no goals. And we were like, goals are good. But that was a little misleading. That really what it was is that they kind of have big picture goals, directions, but in terms of those rigid kind of goals, the benchmark, they don't benchmark. Absolutely do not benchmark. Right. In 6 months I'll have this, and then I'll get married in 18 months. And I mean, A, that's a setup for disappointment. And B, it's almost like you have blinders on.
Yeah.
So what they would say is every day, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but every day I'm open to the possibilities. Because life has this funny way, the person sitting next to you on the plane, if you start, talking, could be the next, ticket to something interesting. I don't know, that kind of came out wrong, but you know what I mean.
You're going to be on a plane soon.
Right. You get the gist. So options and hope. I mean, that if you think about hopeless is I have no options. Right. I'm stuck. So as human beings, we get that blast of good chemicals when we open up options. The next one, I think this one is like a win-win, which is appreciation, and it's about appreciating your own life, but also expressing appreciation. That happy people really have the intention to express it. So they don't just notice when somebody does something that makes a contribution. When they notice, then they tell. Mm-hmm. And we get that if it's authentic. If it's BS, then obviously a manipulation, it doesn't work. But I'm going to tell you, this is the one I'll tell like a little story, because I know we're kind of running out of time. But we also teach at Stanford. I don't know if we're one of the few maybe that teaches both at Stanford and Berkeley. And we teach in this happiness class, and we have this assignment for our students to go find someone during the course of the week that typically you don't even pay any attention to or notice, that in some ways actually contributes to your life, and express appreciation to them. Now, so students at Stanford, whatever background they came from, at least by being at Stanford, they're probably somewhat privileged, at least at this moment in time. So next week, they all come back, and this one guy in our class that I think he was on the football team, and just, super cool, kind of, not too much emotion, and he says, yeah, I got a story. So here's the story. He's in his dorm room, he's looking out the window, and it's Wednesday morning, and he sees the woman coming that delivers the clean sheets every Wednesday, and he thinks, oh, okay. So he goes downstairs, he says to her, can I talk to you for a minute? And she's like, what, is there a hole in your sheets or whatever? And he said, I have to tell you, every Wednesday, and this was true, when I get in, I just so look forward to having these clean sheets. And I recognize that you're the one responsible for that. And I just want to thank you so much. So that's like 2 sentences and 20 seconds. She cried. She said, I've been doing this for 12 years and you're the first student that ever thanked me. And he cried. So, to me, the point of this whole thing is it doesn't take very much energy, but it's one of those intentions that you really have to, because I know this is true for me. Like I think it all the time, but it's the trigger to say it. I think it's so important, particularly in the world right now where so much feels out of our control. And this is, we're meant to connect as human beings. We want to connect. We're a tribe, clan kind of species.
Yeah, we're built to do it in many ways.
Yeah.
We really are.
So the next one is giving, without the expectation of a return, just because somehow, I'll say another Berkeley word, just kind of the karma of giving. It comes back to you in a way, maybe not directly, but in ways that, and I think these days just having the intention to help is something that makes us feel good about ourselves. If we just have the intention to help people. And the last one is truth, which is a deeper discussion. It's truth to self, but it's also telling the truth. But what we see, even on a health, because we connect these all up to positive health outcomes as well. If you think about a lie detector test, what is it measuring? All these negative things that are happening in our body, right? Our pulse rate goes up, our heart rate zooms, our breathing gets shallow. So the model itself is all synergistic. What we would say is it all kind of balances each other. In other words, so if giving's so good, why don't I just give all day long? Well, because it wouldn't be accountable, and I wouldn't live my centralities, and they all have to work.
Well, this sounds wise. The very notion of having I can't remember the term used, but hope and a vision, if you will. I can imagine, if my intention is to be happy and I have a vision of how to execute that, not a roadmap, but a vision. I kind of know what direction to go in. That's exactly, we don't do it to be happy, but that's how I try and run the laboratory. I say to the people in the lab when they come in, I want to figure out how the brain works, right? And I know we're not going to do that. We'd have to get extraordinarily lucky. It's extremely complicated. Right. But I have a vision of some of the things that we will be able to know. Okay? One of them is how I think, for example, how I feel. And these are long goals, and we'll make our decisions day to day, okay, with that in mind, right? And I trust that we'll make good decisions, okay, when we have that vision clearly articulated. We haven't written it down on the wall or anything like that, but as a guy that runs a laboratory that has a lot of bright people who want to, be themselves and should be allowed to be themselves, half of the goal is to get them to be themselves in a right way, that I have, chosen that this is the right way. So that makes complete sense to me, because what I have learned is that almost everything important that we've discovered and understood, okay, has looked like a mistake. Okay? It was always something that we didn't expect that actually was devastating at times, made everything not make sense and so on. But it was really by sort of having this long view of things that allowed it to realize itself and express itself in some funny way as wow, we're really learning about how brains work.
Yeah, right.
As we go on, because our whole point wasn't to get the experiment to work. The point was to figure out how brains work, and
Yeah,
this
right.
is showing us that.
And not knowing how you're going to get there is part of the joy of the.
Yeah, I really like
experience.
that, but it takes time and practice for myself,
Yes.
as well as certainly others, to
Yeah.
to deal with that uncertainty.
Thank you. Yeah.